And don't worry, Becky and Nathan are far from me, and we've agreed that I can take off my mask for my message. So here I am after a year. I'm still here. Okay. Okay. I know. I'm glad you're excited. A tale is told of a pious man who gave regularly to tzedakah. Once he went and sat on a ship. A wind arose and the ship sunk in the sea. Rabbi Akiva saw him and came before the court of law to witness that it was permitted for his wife to remarry. Before Rabbi Akiva had time to bring his evidence, the man came and stood before him. The rabbi said to him, "Are you not the person who was drowned at sea?" He says, "Yes." "So who brought you out of the sea?" He said to him, "The charitable acts that I performed brought me from the sea." He said to him, "How do you know?" He said to him, "When I descend into the deepest depths of the abyss, I heard a huge noise from the waves, one of which was saying to the other, 'Run and pull this man from the water, for all his life he has performed charity.'" When he heard this, Rabbi Akiva declared, "Blessed is the Lord of Israel, who chose the words of the Torah and the words of the sages, that the words of the sages are always relevant, as it is written in the book of Proverbs, 'Charity saves from death.'" How much we wish that this was so. But we know that it isn't so. Charity is wonderful, but is no spiritual amulet against danger, disease, tragedy, or death. This same religious issue arises in the Torah reading for this Shabbat. Let me quote two different parts of our portion. It says, "If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments," my obviously being God, "I will grant your rains in the season, so that the earth shall yield its produce and the trees of the field their fruit. Your threshing shall overtake the vintage, your vintage shall overtake the sowing, and you shall eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land." To put it simply, follow the Torah and good things will happen. God will reward you for your obedience and care. And then yet several verses later we read, "But if you don't obey me and don't observe all of these commandments, I will wreak misery upon you. Consumption and fever which cause the eyes to pine and the body to languish, you shall sow your seeds to no purpose, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you. You shall be routed by your enemies, and your foes shall dominate you." To put it bluntly, God will make your life a living hell if you do not obey God's commandments. But we know the reality does not align with these two texts. Following the Torah does not ensure good agricultural output. Following the Torah does not necessarily give one a long life, a good marriage, business success, and an overflowing 401k account. We can make all kinds of nicely sounding religious statements or proclamations because we want them to be true, but they're not. A compelling religion should not be based on flawed logic or affirmations. Now let me share with you my view of this topic. And I've been struggling with the story that I shared with you and these biblical texts that I've been struggling with for decades. For some of you, what I will say will make sense, and for some of you, it will disappoint. But I must be kind of transparent with you about what I believe about this subject. Much of what happens in the world is random. Not everything happens for a reason. And often things are quite unfair. If you want evidence of that, go and spend some time at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City where innocent children are sick. They've done nothing wrong to deserve any of it. Surprisingly, the rabbis of the Talmud back me up. Here is a statement that is found in the Talmud. Rav Ami declares that people only die for sins they have committed. And after some deliberation, the Talmud concludes there is death without sin. There is suffering without iniquity. And this is the conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rav Ami. The rabbis acknowledge that the world is unfair and it's necessary, and when evil happens, doesn't mean anyone's being punished, it's just because it is. What do I think is the proper Jewish response in the face of a world that is unjust at times? First, compassion for the sufferer. God represents the call to human response. We are the instruments of that compassion. Act with compassion. Be a support to those in need. God wants that from us. No, God demands that from us, according to Jewish tradition. And second, let us repair those things that are broken, to minimize the possibility of evil and take responsibility where responsibility is warranted. Last Friday, I mentioned this briefly, but the reality of what I mentioned has unfolded in a very painful way this week. Last Friday, Israel confronted this horrible stampede that killed 45 people in northern Israel who were visiting the grave of a Jewish holy man called Shimon Bar Yochai as part of their celebration of Lag BaOmer. Now, we wish great comfort on those who suffered loss and experienced injury. But I find it offensive that people try to find some theological meaning in this disaster. And they proclaim that there must be some kind of positive religious significance to it. You know, God must have had some purpose in what happened. Yes, there is religious significance to this horrible event. These Haredi Jews, these quote-unquote ultra-Orthodox Jews, allowed their religious commitments to get in the way of their own safety, in the same way that many refuse to follow COVID-19 protocols. Records reveal that if Mount Meron site, where all of this took place, had hosted any other kind of event, then police safety regulations would have limited attendance to roughly 15,000 people. Last Friday events saw more than 100,000 people in attendance. No public authority was ready to challenge the decision to hold the event because they did not want to alienate the Haredi community. One political leader within the ultra-Orthodox community said this, and I quote, "The government clerks don't understand. This is a holy day and the largest gathering of Jews each year. Bad things," he suggested, "don't happen to Jews on religious pilgrimage. One should trust in Rabbi Shimon in times of distress." In other words, visiting this sage supposedly has some kind of, in his death, he somehow has some kind of protection over the people who have come to visit him. How can anyone take such a statement seriously? It is offensively negative and ignorant. This kind of religious affirmation, in my opinion, is disgraceful. Religion can never endorse the abdication of reason. Too many people in a small place make the possibility of a stampede quite likely. That is how the world works. God has nothing to do with this. Religion is not magic. Religion must call us to responsibility, to reasoned action. God does not protect us from bad decisions. God calls upon us to make wise decisions, to use our judgment, to make the world as safe as we can. Those who associate God as a source of miraculous protection are not worshiping God, but distorting God so they do not have to take responsibility for their mistakes or are intoxicated with their own religious fanaticism. And for those who advocate actions that are reckless, they are guilty, and religion cannot be used as a cloak against responsibility. This is the faith that I affirm on this Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.